Hello, it is me, Insanely ADD, here with another Speedpaint, which I had just finished. I am recording this now to, tell you about my theory that Papyrus is the Knight. Other people have also had this theory before, but what I'm about to read is actually a script that I wrote and researched myself. So, if there's other people who've made the same theory before and have different arguments for it, then that's great. I'd love to hear more arguments about Papyrus being the Knight. Before we start, I'm going to lay out everything we know about the Knight so far in Deltarune. 1. The Knight is choosing abandoned and little-used rooms as locations for the fountains. 2. The Knight seemingly only makes one fountain a day. 3. The Knight hid in the closet from Noelle and Birdley, making the Cyberworld fountain in there, which rules out anyone with an alibi for this incident. 4. The Knight is a lightener because darkeners cannot make fountains. Evidence about the Knight that I will ignore on purpose because it holds no weight to me. 1. The use of exclusively it-they pronouns for the Knight because the use is obviously to maintain the mystery. 2. The Queen's holographic depiction of the Knight's hand cannot be taken as a literal and accurate depiction because the actual film in the mansion states outright that the stream of darkness from the fountain obscures the Knight's true appearance, and the implication is that the Knight immediately left this world unlike the abandoned classroom. 3. The line about communion from Speedpaint, because Speedpaint is deeply unreliable, as half of what he says are infomercial taglines. The words in parentheses were indirectly confirmed to be snippets taken from elsewhere in the Speedpaint sweepstakes, and can be interpreted as being synonyms or associated words for what he actually means to say, but cannot for whatever reason. Plus, the line is divorced from its full context in the conversation, where his first use of communion without relation to the Knight is about his transformation. The use of the word communion here is very unlikely to be literal or even religious, as the word communion's very definition has a non-religious variation. Speedpaint speaks in religious terms because a good chunk of spam emails are about religion, not because it is a legitimate hint. Step 1. Discussing alternate theories. I thought Chris was the Knight. We may have seen Chris open a fountain at the end of Chapter 2, but this doesn't mean they're the Knight. I feel like the end of the chapter is another misdirect, just like Chapter 1. Oh, is Chris evil? Are they possessed by Kara? Nah, there's a little shit who wanted to go eat some pie. Chapter 2 brings about the same kind of gut reaction questions, which is a fair response, though I feel the need to point out that no mystery in Undertale or Deltarune is ever so easily handed to us. Chris, upon seeing the first dark fountain that they and Susie encounter, reacts by fearfully backing away. Chris seemingly doesn't know what it is, and their gut reaction is that it is scary. This wouldn't be how you'd expect them to react if they had already made one. Secondly, the computer lab Dark World had to have been made with Noelle and Birdley already inside, with the closet flavor text implying that the Knight was in there. When the fountain is dispelled, they're sitting at the desk with their homework out and think they just fell asleep while doing it. Chris and Susie come into that world when it has already been made, and when it's dispelled, they're by the door. If the characters' physical light world bodies moved in conjunction with their dark world selves, then at the very least they should all be standing right next to each other because they're so close together in the dark world. I also don't think Noelle and Birdley would have been able to easily dismiss the dark world as a dream if they had somehow walked into a pulsing darkness. I highly doubt Birdley would have needed more than one look to realize that it was probably evil and shouldn't be messed with. Noelle is easily frightened and likes to be afraid, but Birdley isn't the type of person who would make Noelle feel encouraged to do something spooky. I heard a theory that a darkener is the Knight. Well, to start, I know this theory, and darkeners cannot make fountains. This is not subtext or implications, this is directly stated in Chapter 2 by Queen, and Ralsei, who knows even more about how dark worlds work, does not refute this claim. This is why she tried to get Noelle to make a fountain and didn't try to make one herself. A darkener of any origin is incapable of being the Knight. What about Alvin? I find the supposed motivations for this character to be completely disconnected to what we actually know about him. Beyond that, Alvin is literally such a minor character that you could simply never interact with him, and that doesn't build very much feelings towards him that would be in some way dismantled by the reveal of him as the Knight. Also, the game itself sees him as such a minor character that he doesn't have a talk sprite, nor speech font, and if you pick his name when you make the character before Chapter 1, the narrator has no remark about him, not even an interesting. What about Asriel? The man is not even in town. As previously stated, the Cyberworld fountain had to have been made with Birdley and Noelle already in the room. What about Sans? Sans doesn't feel like he wants to end the world or find escapism, the two major Knight profiles that could be argued, which I will be getting to shortly. There's really nothing I can think that casts suspicion on him at all. Yeah, Sans is a little weirdo, but not in Deltarune. All the weird stuff about him are text options that we say, that Toby wrote with the major Sans theory hype in mind. Nothing about him specifically is actually suspicious or unusual. What about Gaster? Gaster is already heavily implied to be in some way responsible for the creation of the secret bosses and/or is the man behind the tree giving us eggs. The person responsible for making Jevil lose his mind is talked about by Sham in a way that implies they are a separate character from the Knight, as well as giving the impression that both the secret bosses were corrupted for some time before the fountains were made. Using Gaster, a character we know nothing about, feels like an easy answer that is simultaneously not very compelling because we don't know anything about him. His supposed motivations could be anything. Whether he's got good intentions or evil intentions are irrelevant because there's just no way to know. Narratively, it means nothing if a man with no history is trying to make Dark Worlds for reasons none of us can properly guess. What about the mayor? Once again, the cyberworld being made with two people already in the room, especially since one of them is Noelle, would imply the mayor left during the middle of the day. But when we check in with her aides in the office, none of them mention her having left, which feels like something notable since she keeps herself so busy. I also want to propose the idea that while she may come across as potentially harsh, I think there's a non-zero chance she just threw herself into her work entirely after what happened to Des, and has lost touch because of her grief. What about Des? Des is seemingly lost, as confirmed by the Spampton sweepstakes, with one major possibility being that she is trapped inside the code. For a character in such a position, we can't even say if it's possible for her to open the Dark Fountains. But there's also the still remaining factor that the Knight is choosing little-used rooms on purpose and hiding in a closet when people enter a room to use it, which isn't something someone who is seemingly trapped in total darkness would feel compelled to do. What about the player? Since we are the player, I think we can rule us out since we didn't do anything. I tried to find posts detailing this theory and couldn't find anything, so that's my whole counter-argument. The Knight is someone we haven't met yet and have never seen before. For the same reasons as the Gaster theory, this doesn't make sense, except it would be even worse, because we have scraps of info on Gaster at least, like how he speaks like how old people text, he's a science nerd, possibly malevolent, perhaps deceased, but very likely undead. Step 2. Building a profile of the Knight. Does the Knight have bad intentions? I feel like there is insufficient proof that the Knight is acting with malicious intent by making these dark worlds. At the moment, what we have seen is the Knight seemingly makes only a single dark fountain a day. If the Knight wanted to bring about the roaring, there's no need for them to actively choose little used or totally abandoned rooms, and no need for them to do so slowly, if they even know about the roaring at all, which seemingly no one but Ralsei did before the end of Chapter 2. Yes, the Knight is referred to as the Roaring Knight, but the Queen calls them that while still not knowing what the roaring is. It's possible the Knight calls themselves that, and also doesn't know what it refers to. I feel confident that the probability the Knight even knows about the end of the world side effects is low. If they do know about it, it's also possible that, however, the Knight even found out how to make the Dark Worlds, gave enough information about how they function that they could reason themselves into continuing to make them by saying, oh, just one a day isn't so bad, which once again circles around to the Knight being more irresponsible than outright homicidal. Plus, it really doesn't vibe with Toby's storytelling methods for there to just be a straight-up villain who wants to end the world. If you mention Kara, I will stomp you to death with my hooves. They have nuances that people ignore. Does the Knight have good intentions? So if it's very unlikely that the Knight wants to end the world on purpose, then conversely we must consider the possibility that they have good intentions. It's very likely that they could have intentions that align with the kids' intentions in Chapter 2. Every single one of them, including Chris, despite their lack of vocal approval, loved the Dark World because it gave them a sense of purpose and importance. It made them feel like they had control and were given the recognition they craved. These are not purely noble intentions, of course, they're pretty selfish even, but in this scenario, the Knight doesn't know about the apocalyptic side effects of opening dark fountains, so self-fulfillment from stabbing the ground until it gives you a magical world doesn't sound so bad. The desire to feel wanted, helpful, strong, and in control in ways that you are not in the light world, I feel, could be a strong and compelling motivation for making dark worlds. Plus, since the Knight hid in the closet knowing the two others would be in the Dark World when it formed, it could also be a desire to be seen as a cool figure, since the leader of the Dark Worlds always seemed to revere the Knight to some extent for what they've done, and this effect may bleed over onto them. Or maybe the Knight thinks they'll come to love the Dark Worlds like they do, which is true. That's what happened. Inferences that can be made if the Knight just has similar intentions as the kids did. The Knight feels like they lack purpose in the light world. The Knight is unlikely to have very many friends or social connections and is likely lonely. The Knight may feel strongly powerless about something. The Knight is unsatisfied with their life and wants to find an escape. Step 3. Papyrus Points of Interest. Papyrus is the only main Undertale character who has yet to even speak to us, and that feels significant somehow. The Steam page mentions him and says that he's busy. I know some people who are worried that he won't even make an appearance, but he definitely will. When you type in his name while you make your character, you get the response interesting to typing in Papyrus, and also his speech font is in the game files. A quick reminder of something that I find interesting is that in Undertale, when you check Papyrus's closet, he says, "There's no one in my closet except me sometimes," which, given the place the knight undoubtedly hid in Chapter 2, it's interesting. You know what else is interesting? All the references that seem relevant to Papyrus and Sans, specifically that are in Deltarune. The teleportation doors are identical to Sans' door from Undertale. The lounge chairs that Lancer and Susie relax on are almost identical to the one that Sans is seen relaxing on in the Kickstarter trailer for Undertale. Susie says she invited the guards she beat up to visit the garbage can, which is a reference to something Papyrus says if you check the garbage can while on your hangout at his house. Icy's Pizza and the word search, of course. I think it's interesting that the first Dark World is completely puzzle-themed. Checkers, Legos, those make sense for a room for small children, but playing cards? Chess? Those feel out of place for a kindergarten to preschool type room. Continuing on with the references, in the second hospital room when you check the two sinks it says perhaps there was one tall sink that was cut in half to create both of them, which is simultaneously a reference to the theory that Sans and Papyrus are pieces of Gaster, and to Papyrus's own tall sink from Undertale that is also referenced in the Winter Alarm Clock dialogue. Also, the character of Trashy the Trash Can is a reference to a more obscure phone call that you have with Papyrus at the dump in Undertale. Of course, there is also the fact that Papyrus wants to be a royal guard in Undertale, essentially a knight. Here's a single sentence of evidence to support Knight Papyrus. The fountains only recently started opening, and only recently have the skeletons moved to town. An interesting coincidence. This one probably isn't a reference to Papyrus, but the pop-up about making a knife out of spaghetti and the spaghetti goat item in Chapter 2 are interesting. This concludes the interesting little tidbit section. Step 4. Connections between Papyrus and the knight profile we have built. What could Papyrus's motivation for making these dark worlds even be? My first instinct with this is actually solely based on the fact that when I was younger my family moved nearly once a year and I was never able to make long-time friends. He just moved to town and it's very unlikely he knows anyone there, so I think he's lonely. Sans' first thought was trying to get Chris to hang out with his brother, so surely Sans must be aware that his brother needs to make friends. Now, I feel it isn't a stretch to assume the base personality of every character is roughly similar to how they are in Undertale. Toriel is still motherly and a teacher, Alphys is still a pop culture nerd with anxiety who wants to be liked, Undyne is brash and assertive but good-hearted, etc, etc. There are, of course, notable differences, but not knowing people or disliking someone they normally like doesn't change the core of who they are. So if we assume that Papyrus's base personality is the same, then it is very easy to say he is lonely and wants friendship, and it's also easy to assume that he would be a bit single-minded and ignore potential risks in pursuit of his goals. How could Papyrus even make the Dark Worlds? I feel like just like you could presume that your preferred knight candidate read about it in a book or heard about it online or something, you could presume the same about Papyrus. I feel like how the knight even learned about it will probably be explained in a later chapter, because it must be something that's not written anywhere, but that's all theory crafting for a different time. The thematic evidence. Now it's time for the thematic evidence. There's actually two sets of thematic evidence I want to go over with this. The first is a Tumblr post by Don't Touch the Flower Child with dashes between each word. They wrote, Hot Take 2.0. Papyrus is way more likely to be in control than Flowey is when it comes to, well, just about anything. Insult Papyrus all you like during your date/hangout, it won't change the outcome. Call him a loser after your fight with him and he turns the insult back on you. In No Mercy, he believes in you, whether or not you eventually decide to kill him. He might not be able to stop you, but damn, he's not going to let your choices change him. He's the adult here. He has the situation under his control. Your choices don't matter with Papyrus. Flowey, on the other hand, is way more impressionable. You can get a reaction out of him several seconds into his tutorial by dodging his bullets. How you decide to play the game greatly determines his actions and demeanor. Kill him at the neutral ending and he never shows up again. Spare him and he begins to learn from your actions. It's understandable because he's young and lost and confused, and arguably, player choice matters so greatly in Undertale precisely because Flowey is at the narrative center. Now, you look at the exact opposite message in Deltarune, where your choices don't matter, and suddenly Knight Papyrus Theory makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? In Deltarune, it's very likely that the final confrontation with the knight will involve showing the choices the knight has made are detrimental and dangerous, and they need to change their choices. So, your choices don't matter, but theirs do. As for the other set of thematic evidence, a continuously recurring theme in all of Deltarune is the theme of being forgotten. From Don't Forget and nearly every song in Chapter 1 having a leitmotif of it, to all the main characters feeling in some way left behind and abandoned, to all the Dark Worlds, even the one that Chris makes, being in rooms no one uses anymore, and above all else, especially the secret bosses. Chris possibly feels left behind by their brother. Susie was basically left behind by the whole system and their classmates. Ralse literally lived alone in a completely empty dark world. Noelle lives essentially all alone because her sister is missing, her father is in the hospital, and her mom is a workaholic. Birdley outright states that he feels like no one cared about him before he became smart. The 3 dark fountains we've seen so far have all been made in rooms that no one uses or are totally abandoned. The classroom has likely not seen anyone since Alvin was a child. The computer lab has had a few people in there, but it is definitely not the bustling hub it presumably used to be with the internet down in town. Even the living room hasn't seen much use because Toriel and Chris just aren't TV people, leaving the TV dusty and the room unused. Now, the secret bosses are the epitome of this theme. I actually realized this entire thematic through line in connection to Papyrus because I was using its thematic connection to the secret bosses to try figuring out who the secret boss of this next Dark World could be. Jevil is forgotten, even amongst those of the Forgotten Classroom, not just because he's been locked away in a prison for who knows how long, but also because Joker cards aren't needed for most card games, and you have to specifically buy packs that include them. Spamton is forgotten not only because he was evicted from polite society and all traces of his existence have been pasted over with images of the Queen, so now he lives in a dumpster, the trash bin on a computer, but also spam emails most of the time are automatically flagged and put directly into a special folder you probably don't even look at unless you're trying to find an email that might have been accidentally put there by the automated system. Papyrus is a character in Undertale who tries in every way that he can to be noticed and appreciated. Despite this, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single character in Snowden who even knows his name. His mailbox, in comparison to Sans, is surprisingly empty, and while you can read it as him just checking his box more often, he refers to his mailbox as his emptiness. And the already discussed implication seems to be that he just doesn't get mail from anyone. He says that he's a dozen followers away from double digits online. He says, "I never wonder what having lots of friends is like," which is an obvious lie. And of course, in the No Mercy route, what does his check information say? Forgettable. Papyrus has been on theme for Deltarune since 2015. Step 5. But what about these things? How did he know of the classroom? Toriel spoke with Sans the day before Chris and Susie discovered the dark fountain in the abandoned classroom. It's very possible she mentioned something about it to Sans, and Sans passed that information on to Papyrus. How did he get in there? There's this sick little thing called breaking and entering, but also, yeah, it really isn't out of the question that he broke in. Any Knight candidate that doesn't actively go to school there or work as a teacher would have to break in to make that world. It seems not completely out of the realm of possibilities at all. Why would an Undertale character get such a major role in Deltarune? This is just a personal observation, but I think Toby obviously likes Papyrus a lot. He has the most lines of any character in Undertale by a long shot, and is only about 300 lines behind the narrator. Toby Fox commissioned art of him over a year before the game's release. Toby made a special version of Bone Trousel for Undertale trailers that has been featured in nearly every single Undertale trailer that's ever been made. Outside of that rather subjective line of reasoning, I also think Papyrus could have a major role because, as I have previously laid out, he thematically has very strong ties to Deltarune, and we know literally nothing about Papyrus's backstory in Undertale. I feel like Papyrus, despite all the lines he gives, is rather understated in his presence in Undertale. Like, you can't get the true pacifist ending without him, and if you kill him and only him, Undyne still manages to rally monsters to overthrow Toriel. But these aren't big flashy moments like Sans' fight, so they're rarely acknowledged. I feel there is a potential for him to be important, and it is irrelevant that he was originally from Undertale. The amount of Lightner characters, specifically because only they could open the fountains, exclusive to Deltarune are minuscule, and most are very obviously not the Knight. Just from a pure numbers perspective, the odds of the Knight being a character exclusive to Deltarune are much smaller, because there's still more characters that are here that are also in Undertale. Also, Toriel is obviously going to be in the Dark World in this next chapter, so Undertale characters are obviously not banned from partaking in the actual plot. Why would he be similar to his Undertale counterpart? As I have mentioned, none of the characters at their core are super different from their Undertale counterparts. This isn't like the fandom where you can just make whatever personality up you want and then have it inhabit a Sans-shaped shell. Toby has an obviously different interpretations of AUs, and in his AU, the characters are a lot like they are in Undertale. It would be way more unusual at this point if Papyrus is revealed to be drastically different than his Undertale counterpart at all. He's obviously not going to be an asshole, he isn't going to be internet famous, we've already observed that he isn't outgoing, which, contrary to popular belief, does still fit with how Undertale Papyrus is. You could even take the sound of trousled bones growing further away from us when we check the door to mean that Papyrus is moving away from reality and sinking further into the fantasy of the Dark Worlds. Well, that was my whole theory. I really hope that you all enjoy it. I did a lot of research. It took me a couple weeks to completely write it all, and I have since had to even edit it because of the Spampton Sweepstakes, obviously. Most people who have made theories before the Spampton Sweepstakes and were going to publish them afterwards have had to do that. But I really hope you all enjoyed it, and the speed paint. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe.